Hello everyone, and welcome to AIGA webcast. Today is Design Census Day, and this webcast is presented by AIGA Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. I'm very happy to present to you our three guests, two of whom are with me. One of them is on screen. Let me start to ask them to introduce themselves. Ladies first.
My name is Jacinda Walker. I'm a graphic designer. I am also the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, and I own and operate a studio called Design Explorer.
And I'm Jonathan Lee, producer in the room, and I'm the current chapter president for New York City. And I also work at Google and was happy to partner with AIGA on this project.
And Antoinette?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Antoinette Curl. I was the founding chair of the Diversity Inclusion Task Force. Now I'm the chair emerita. I'm also president of AIGA St. Louis, and I am president and CEO and founder of Creative Reaction Lab.
Thank you. So this project, the Design Census, is a collaboration between AIGA and Google. It was launched last week to capture the state of the design community. In its inception, the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force came up with this idea of a survey that we needed to know who was part of this design industry, who was, the components of this design community that we're talking to and that we're working with. So the goal of this design census is, really to capture who do we have amongst ourselves. The idea around this webcast is to really become like the tool to invite new voices, to capture the new practices and the new perspective that we have around us. At a time when these communications around diversity and inclusion have been more important than ever. So I would like to start this conversation by giving you, our audience, a little bit of background and pass it on to Antoinette to give us a little bit more detail on how this idea of the survey came about. Antoinette?
Thank you, Leticia. So in 2013, I approached the AIGA team about having a diversity initiative. And at that time, inclusion wasn't really embedded into it because historically it hadn't been within AIGA. And then after a year of work and partnering with chapter leaders and talking with individuals that had formerly been involved with AIGA finally greenlit the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. And one of the biggest things that I wanted to focus on was this idea of sustainability, as well as the idea of knowing who we're actually serving and beyond just the 26,000 members. And so in 2014, we not only pitched for a full-time diversity and inclusion staff person, which is now Obed Figueroa in the national office as the diversity and inclusion resident, but part of his role was to be dedicated to a program deemed Design Census, which the idea, kind of to Leticia's point, was to understand who's in the room, who's our audience, but then also who's not in the room and who has been excluded over time, and really how's our industry changing and molding and shaping and transitioning over the years. Because when we started AIGA, as we know, the acronym used to mean the American Institute of Graphic Artists. We no longer use that because we are in the industry of design. And design isn't just graphic design. That takes many different shapes and forms. We have design strategists, we have design anthropologists, we have design researchers, we have UX designers. And so we needed to have something beyond the previous survey that focused on the salary in our industry to really understand what were the demographics of our industry, what are the psychographics, what do we like to do, and by having this knowledge, we'll be able to provide better strategies, better programming for not just the AIGA community, but the community outside of AIGA, but still the design community overall. And I also saw it as an opportunity for it to be a great collaborative tool to bring in thought leaders such as Google to have a conversation and dialogue of what's the future of design and what can we do together collaboratively to really catapult our industry to the place that it's organically going, but we can kind of streamline that process and be part of that movement. And I'm very happy that AIGA and Google has partnered to bring this to fruition 2 years after the inception of the original ideas. And I'm very excited to know that they're going to, in some form or shape or form, AIGA is going to continue with this process in the future. Because for us, if we don't know who we're serving, are we really serving our community? And that's really the backbone of the work, and that's the backbone of the census.
Thank you for this background. So it's a way, in a way, the census is going to help us influence the design practice.
It is. It's one of those where we as an industry, and I'll be very transparent about this, we are disruptors. By nature of what we do, we are building the world. And yet many people do not consider what we do actually part of the mainstream society. We still have to fight for a seat at the table. We still have to find value and prove our value in our work. And yet we know when you go outside and you look and you see design everywhere, but the world doesn't know that. And so if we can't come together as an industry and one, have common language and common understanding of who we are, how are we going to go to other industries and say, this is what value and this is what we bring to the table, and this is the industries that you can work within if you want to come through this pipeline of a design world. And so it's very much 360 in the way that it can be used, whether we're looking at it client facing, whether we're looking at it in just a business capacity standpoint, or we can look at it just within our echoing chamber of design and saying, how do we be more inclusive in our language and inclusive in our practice to bring in all types of designers, and say, not only is AIGA focusing on design holistically, but a lot of design leaders, especially the partners that have signed on to be the initial partners for the design census, we are representing you in its entirety and not just what has historically been done.
Mm-hmm. And just before I pass it on to Jonathan, I want to mention like another survey that was done recently by the Center for Urban Futures in New York. I don't know if you heard about this one. A couple of years ago, it was updated. And it did impact greatly the city of New York, the city council, and NYC and Co. And basically was the sort of fodder for the creation of the NYC by Design Steering Committee, which I really glad to sit on. It's interesting how it was actually instrumentalized to make politicians act upon design in the city of New York. So speaking of the city of New York, Jonathan, you are the president of the AIGA chapter, but here you're wearing your hat of Google, and you're the creative director at Google Design. Tell us a little bit about how this project came about concretely, like from the origin, the aspiration, and the process.
Sure. So I have a small presentation for everyone to kind of follow along. But we at Google Design were really happy to have the opportunity to partner with AIGA. And when we started, when you kind of make a partnership with somebody, you kind of ask yourself, well, what are the core things about us that go really well with the things that we're able to collaboratively with? And so, starting from that place, Google's mission is to organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful. And so right now we're only in the first phase, and the first phase is actually what you see now. So at designcensus.org, on your desktop or your mobile, you can go there and see the site, and in these 3 sections you might see some coming soons. But the first and bulk of the information gathering happens in the survey section. So that's the part 1. This is important to remember. There's 3 parts. Okay. So the survey is now open. It's about 53 questions, and what we're trying to do is do more than capture the salary and the financials. We're looking at diversity, and we're looking at commute times, and lots of things about just being a human and being participatory in the industry. So these are some examples, like, do you hire freelancers? Yes or no? Or there might be multiple choice questions, or quickly a slider kind of value input. So part 2 is coming soon, and this is something that we are actually working on, still developing right now. So we're going to do a very, very quick high-level snapshot of some of the results and give lightweight filtering. So for example, being able to, take a single question and look at it and say, okay, well now I want to filter and drill down for this information. So this stuff is actually being developed by the development team as we speak. The next phase is also really important, and this is also where you can get involved. Part of the results and this project is that we're going to publish all that data in this raw form. So you can take the raw data and you can make something of it. Like I said, activating that creativity. So this is just a screenshot, if you go to the next slide, of the gallery that's going to happen where you can submit interpretations or analysis of that data to kind of raise awareness or highlight the things that you think are really important to discuss. The one thing I did want to, let everyone know is that because we're halfway through we're getting to the halfway point of the open survey, I went back and went online and looked at all the PDFs of the salary surveys for the last few years, and the requests, the asks went out to a very, very broad mailing list of AIGA, and then I also captured the number of people who responded, and then looked at that percentage, right? And so if you go to the next slide, I really want to know, are we going to do better than we've done before?
Yes.
And so that's my presentation, and I just want to thank everybody because this actually takes a lot of people to get this project off the ground. So both the D&I initiative, the AIGA chapters, for all of you who are out there and asking your members to get involved and your non-members to get involved, to the members who have taken the survey, thank you. I know that it took some of your time away from your day. To W&Co, who is the development team, helping us kind of iterate on this process as we get it off the ground, to our partners who are helping us reach a broader audience than just AIGA, and to the teams at Google and at AIGA National who are helping us shepherd this project forward.
Thank you, Jonathan. This is great. So we talked about like the challenge sometimes of just inviting people to take a survey, right? I mean, you're constantly bombarding with this survey, whether you're just buying your thing at Amazon or something else. I want to turn to Jacinda now, and you were just telling me about your personal experience launching, surveys and this whole data. And I would like you, Jonathan, to also react to this question about like data. There's no such thing as like not qualified data. Like, who do we ask people? How do we reach out? How do we use the census as a tool to basically expand your tactics to diversify and include people that were not part of the conversation?
Well, I think that's a really significant question because we haven't been doing it very well before, because we don't have that data. And being able to actually do this survey and see who is really here and how to provide support and how to provide opportunities, how to create programs and activities and initiatives, that's a critical component. So the first thing that I'm hopeful that this survey, will be able to do is to open up that conversation now in our own offices, in our own studios, in our own living room, practically, because that's not something we've been able to do before. We've been kind of guessing what it might look like and borrowing other people's numbers and bringing them into our workplace. So the first thing is having this will be able to open up conversations to everyday designers doing the kind of work that we do regularly. On the second level is it'll ultimately be able to influence those conversations and the work, and also many different institutions. Educational institutions now will be able to have an opportunity to say, okay, look, we have this many of this type of designer in our community that we learned about from the design census. Okay, so maybe we should think about offering these types of classes now. Perhaps we should look at these types of educators now. Perhaps we should influence and market and solicit information about our programs in these areas, because we know that's where these designers came from. We even know how much coffee they drink. So we haven't been able to do that well. We've been doing okay because we've been borrowing information from other people, but to have our own and to be able to have it open and available and open for interpretation by those individual designers, it's a critical component in any type of research work.
we talked about this a little bit, Antoinette, this idea that the census, it's the first, right? So we're going to do more. This is a lot of experimentation. We're testing. We'll do more.
Yes.
We are actually collecting feedback directly on the survey right now. But at the same time, we're thinking, isn't that like an amazing opportunity to convene conversations, to convene new conversations, and use it as a fodder for this inclusion effort? So I want to turn it to Antoinette in a second to see if you can expand on this.
I am a huge proponent. I believe we need all types of data, and when you have surveys, that's quantitative. You miss that human element. You miss those anecdotes. You miss the element of storytelling. And so we need to have programming and opportunities for people to convene and come together. And it could be, how do we dissect what we've seen in the survey, or it could be, how do we build upon what we've seen in the survey and have dialogue around what our industry is doing next. Because I believe that we're in a pivotal time within our design industry to really start to define it further on what do we want our industry to look like, and not necessarily just what value can AIGA bring to the table, even though I know my fellow AIGA chapter leaders are probably thinking that. Yes, we need to do that as well. But even for the members and the non-members that's on this call, think about, how can I convene community members that I don't regularly see at AIGA gatherings, or I don't see at creative morning gatherings? How do I get them to the table, and how can I have conversations with them to see what we can do to bring a greater community and a greater understanding to our design industry? And storytelling is a huge component of that. Numbers only take you so far. It helps you, really kind of just know the benchmarks. But when you want to expand upon that, when you want to further develop strategy, you have to have those candid conversations. You have to have those safe spaces for that to happen. And I feel like the design census is the beginning of that. But now, to kind of piggyback off Jonathan when he said, let's get you involved, let's have you create, your reflections of what you see in this data. I also am going to encourage you to get involved and actually create convenings and conversations around this data and around what our design industry is looking like going forward. We are the designers of design, and yet we never really talk about it in that way. We talk about how we design for other industries. So you now have power, thank goodness for this open source information, to have a starting ground and say, okay, how can we actually start to define what we're doing going forward, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and continue to have that dialogue going forward.
Thank you. I want to just reach out to Jacinda again and sort of provide our audience with a little bit of background about what the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force has been doing, and really broad brushstrokes here. We will go back to it in sort of separate webcasts, but I think it's really interesting to see the type of challenges that you've been facing and the kind of tools that you had at your disposal to reach out. And we know we have to reach out to 26,000 members to start with, right? Mm-hmm. But you also are very much like public facing in your role. Can you speak a little bit about like a few of the tactics that you have used with your task force members?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the specific things we've been doing is asking each task force member to send out this information through their personal numbers. We all understand that as designers, we know different people, we work with different clients, we work with different vendors. And so being able to kind of get into those individual communities. The other thing that we've also been doing is we've been taking and collecting feedback as well, so that as we do move forward with this project, that our voice and the voice of our audience are captured in this data. We also have been specifically looking to engage other individuals in different Facebook communities, Twitter communities, Slack communities, and just talking and answering questions about that, just being there to kind of walk with people through this process and to let them know that, there may be some challenges, or you may not like all of the questions or something like that, but what's more important is us collecting the data to begin with. Once we have the data will create an access, mm-hmm. which will help us be able to expose more individuals.
And we can correct this question.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
This is like sort of Jonathan, it's like a living document also, in a way. It's like testing while you're collecting data, you're also like preparing yourself to react to it next year. Next iteration.
Okay, so I think, you know, some of the things that we were trying to do here is bring a kind of product design mentality to this, which is, you know, a more modern way of thinking about this project, which is that we're never really done. That we always have to keep refining and listening, collecting that important feedback, and, you know, prioritizing that feedback within the constraints of the projects and the budgets and the time that we all have. And so I think, like we were all saying, the data is not only just a start, but the survey itself is actually also just a start, right? Because that was the first time that we tried to write those questions for those many people, and, you know, solicited across the AIGA chapter leadership and the different committees that AIGA has a set of questions and the partners that they have, you know, to set those questions around, and we refine them a bunch, but you know, it's hard to get those things right. And, you know, as designers, we're just going to keep plugging away and making it better.
Yeah, the hacker mentality, right? But also at Google, I mean, this is a huge company, right? So what's the sort of diversity and inclusion practice or commitment of Google? Like, have you tested this survey even with your team and your staff?
We have, and we were also very involved in trying to get quality assurance done, and I know that the AIGA also helped, different chapters help by testing the site, because when you make a website, it's always going to be full of bugs. And so we did many rounds of also, you know, testing the product itself, but then also getting feedback on those questions, right? And so again, just like launching a lot of any kind of project, you kind of end up having to take a step back, look at all the feedback, and try to address all the issues as you can.
I think this is a perfect segue into another sort of related topic that we've been touching on several times, and most recently at the conference throughout the session that was dedicated to the impact of inclusion, which I was listening to again like this past day. You know, this whole idea of quality, and I think you speak to it from your perspective of like, quality is also something that evolves and that is in this experimental phase. But at the same time, quality and the standards of quality, the standards of excellence that AIGA stands for, have been questioned. Or can diversity and inclusion have this role of questioning how this notion of quality, you know, evolves? Like, it's been pushed by technology. We know that. But is gender and race and the societal issues that we're facing today also like factors that can affect and make us rethink what is a standard quality? And I'm going to turn again to Antoinette, because I know this is one of your favorite topics.
I love you, my fellow designers. And if you don't know me, I am very candid. But as designers, we have a tendency to be very exclusionary in the way that we approach things, because we have these certain standards and this quality that we have defined. But one of the things that we have to ask ourselves is, who's actually defining the quality? One of the things I talk about when I'm always reviewing portfolios with students, I can always tell what school they've come from, especially within my city. You have select schools, and you can always tell because it's the exact same projects. The majority of the time, they look exactly the same, because the definer of the quality in that instance are the instructors. They're the ones telling them what to create. They're the one that giving them the feedback on it. And so I'm always that person saying, how can you show me you? Who are you? How do you get that authentic, organic representation of yourself? And as we know, as designers, that can take many years to get there. But even then, with all of the media and the content that we're regularly receiving, we're being told that a certain amount of design or a certain type of design is representative of what good design is. And that in time has started to really kind of pigeonhole what we can and what we can't do to receive recognition. There's even been call where we can say, look, well, let's do a blind review of the actual work that's being submitted to competitions. But even then, I will be very candid, historically, design has been defined in a very Eurocentric type of representation. We don't consider the design that's being done in club flyers or underground posters as true design. There's been a resurgence of underground posters taking the kind of forefront now, people getting back to hand lettering, people getting back to creating with their hands. But it needs to be led by the collective opposed to the select few or the select perspectives. And so I'm always challenging this idea of quality, because for me it's who are you actually representing when you say quality? Who are you actually representing when you say excellence? And are we excluding community members that have felt marginalized within our industry over the years because they didn't fall into this perfect niche of what quality has been defined within our industry? And I see Jacinda shaking her head, so I know she wants to add to this.
Well, I think I took a couple of notes. And the first thing I want to say, you asked about the questions. It is D&I's role to ask these questions. And these questions are hard. These questions are uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. These questions are making people nervous. But we can't get to that sweet spot of the benefits of all of this work if we can't get to some of these murkier pieces. And being able to define good, as Antoinette's talking about, is a huge piece. It is a huge piece by indicating that. That means that somebody is good and somebody is bad.
Which you're going to get in design anyway. I mean,
right.
This is also the nature of the design crits.
But the problem with that is that depending on who is the definer of the good, yes, that means they're also the definer of what is bad. And so if you're not on that piece, we leave people out. And so when we talk about, is a design census for everybody? It has to be. It's not going to be successful with only one group of individuals participating in it. How can we continue to say that we are the Professional Association of Design and only include our 26,000?
Well, by the way, the census, just to clarify and answer one of the questions that came our way already, the census is open to everyone.
Absolutely. And it when we talk about sharing that data, if we don't get everyone to participate, the data won't be as critical and it won't be as pure. It won't be as pure. It's only a certain segment of people participate. We have to go outside of our circles. We have to go outside of our comfortability. We have to make sure that we talk and engage people who are here, who have just not been asked.
Right, to give them a voice.
Absolutely.
And to that point, like, how do we avoid having assumptions about what is good design while retaining the standards of excellence? I want to turn this to Jonathan. Because, it's you still are a designer, you're part of AIGA New York. So how do you marry those two things? It's almost like, how do you reconcile them? Or how do you think perhaps that phase 2 is going to respond to things that phase 1 cannot answer?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it actually is a very individual and cultural phenomenon, right? This definition of what is good. Mm-hmm. And I think it also has a lot to do with context, right? So some of the things we're discussing are actually about how we're framing our current perspectives based on the context that we either accept or that we either have been told are the contexts. And I think what is good design to me is when you as a designer are performing your very best and being conscious and questioning your context and questioning what is good and being present. You might change that opinion over time because the context around you are dynamic. And so I believe that that's kind of the only way is kind of to keep working through this and being present and being engaged and connected to each other to kind of redefine your context and redefine your practice. And sometimes that takes a little bit of stepping back and answering 53 questions during coffee. And so I think that like it's a start.
Yeah, it's a resilience thing, but it's very Buddhist answer you're just giving us here. I want to hear from Antoinette whether you agree with this or if you have any comments.
For me, framing this in every industry it's not just in design, right? We talk about media framing, media narration. If you talk about the arts, you have art critics in New York that look at art completely differently than artists kind of connoisseurs on the ground in the Midwest. So to Jonathan's point of context, it has to do with geographic. It has to do with, demographics. It has to do with a lot of things that you are kind of exposed to and the access that you have. But we have to also be very candid in understanding that our design industry is still represented by the big cities. And you have the other cities that are trying to push up and say, hey, look at us too. But, when you look at aesthetics and you talk about top designers, most of the time they're from New York because there's so many great design opportunities there, which is understandable, right? You have great design institutions there, but then you also have great design institutions in the South. You have great design institutions in the Midwest and, all around the country. And it's how do we bring the voice to the voiceless, or how do we show the different design aesthetics that is representative of our entire country. And I believe that's why I was always a huge fan of Print Magazine's Regional Design Annual, because in that instance at least it still showed that yes, we are designing it a little differently in different parts of the country, but that works for us. And I want to kind of piggyback and add on to Jonathan's point, 'cause I think he's right. When you do your best and when you're representing you, that is part of, being excellent. But also being excellent to me is also focusing on what problem are we trying to solve. And do we have the greatest amount of perspective? Do we have that true representation in the room and dialogue where we're not creating design just for design's sake? We're at this point in our industry where we are pushing back this mindset of it's only aesthetics. We're trying to say we're more than aesthetics. Yes, we love things to be pretty because that adds to the understanding of what we're showing. But even I have yelled at designers and said, I can't understand that 6-point font. How the world do you expect other people to understand the 6-point font? So it's one where even as designers in our design industry, we have to look at ourselves inward. And to Jonathan's point, step back and say, what are we doing? And are we being representatives and are we challenging this notion of excellence and what has historically been done to a what's for everyone?
To shift it from simply defining excellence from simply an aesthetic point of view.
But that's where this collective piece that Antoinette was talking about. We as collectives can change that. We as a collective group of designers, we can say, okay, you know something, there are some great things going on here in New York with design. But there are also some phenomenal things going on in Austin, and there's some phenomenal things going on in North Dakota, and there's some great things going on in Maine. We don't have to be excluding those. We can include them and make the entire profession better.
Right, and this is, I think, hopefully what the network of chapters of AIG can actually facilitate, right?
Absolutely.
To have a delocated, this is the new buzzword, representation that way. But I want to go back to this aesthetic, and not being just about aesthetic, because I think we had this conversation this last Friday in another webcast about social impact. It's like good design in the 50s was just about how beautiful this logo for this corporation is.
Yes.
But good design today is with the millennials looking at us like, no, if it doesn't have any social impact, forget it. It's not good design. Would you agree with this broad definition? Jonathan?
I'm not sure. I don't know exactly what the discussion was.
Well, you will see it tomorrow.
The last one. So, but I do think that the role and definition of design is rapidly expanding, and the importance of designers and their contributions is the responsibility is equally expanding with that saturation and that broader acceptance in both industry and art and in education. And I think good design is having to also evolve.
Mm-hmm.
In designing design.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to use the last 5 minutes that we have with you and with this amazing panelists here to go back to this phase 2 a little bit and imagine, what are we hoping to have? What are we hoping to make? How are we going to, leverage the sort of the finding, the results? I love when you say results, because it's all about an interpretation of the data in the end. There's no such thing as data. There's interpretation of data. So how can you, Jacinda, imagine you're going to reach out to your task force and beyond, like involve the chapter and say, okay, what can we do with this now?
One of the things that I'm just truly excited about the census being able to prove, is that ultimately we have this is proof now. I wanted to prove and show what the representation of our demographics really are. We get a lot of our information, like I said before, from other individuals. I want to know and I want to be able to prove what it really is when we take our own data.
So you're going to make like a huge infographics?
No, I see representation in chapters. I see representation in companies. I see greater representation in organizations and institutions because they know now where designers are, where designers of color are, where designers who are in marginalized communities are, and what type of work they're doing. I want the proof, and I'm ready to see that from the census.
What about you, Antoinette? Like, what are you going to do with your chapter in St. Louis? Do you already have plans?
No, we don't have plans yet because it's one where we're waiting for it to essentially roll out to then decide what we're going to do. We've already had conversations around how we're going to convene our community, and so we see this data as being part of that. But when it comes to actually creating infographic and data visualization around this, I see that as being a partnership with a lot of great agencies within our community to have them create representations and data visualization based on what they see and kind of collaborate with AIGA St. Louis on that. And then also just doing an open call to our members to allow them to do it. But for me, I am a convener by nature. That's who I am. And I'm a huge fan of storytelling. So for me, if I see to what I saw earlier on one of the presentation slides, where it's saying like the breakdown of percentages of individuals that took the survey and what they're saying just based on this holistic view, I would love to see a story partnered with that and a deep dive into a designer that maybe responded in response to that. So that's my lens. But the beauty of this project, right, is that we in AIGA have 26,000 lands that are membered. We have about 500,000 lens of people that follow us on social. So just think about how many lens we have with our partners adding to that and how the different kind of representations can come out of the diversity of individuals that's in our network. So that's what I want us to challenge to push and say, how do we have multiple viewpoints of responses that come that's representative of all in our industry. I want design strategies. If you don't want to create a data visualization tool, then think about how design strategy can play into this and propose that. If you're a researcher, bring that into the equation as well. I want to see design represented full circle.
Jacinda, what is the current percentage of designers that are African American in the U.S.? Do you have any current stats on that?
Absolutely. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, they collect all the information from our tax and you say, hey, this is what I am. In 2015, I had the opportunity through my own personal research work to research what are those demographics. And the percentages actually decreased from when I first ran the numbers. So currently they're at 3.5%. So that means if you took 100 designers, about 3 would be it. For Latinos, it is at around 9%. For women, it's at about 54%.
Great. And another question that came out where is, what do you all feel that the proof of the true number minority designers will do for the design community in terms of employers?
What, I'm speaking personally, like I think my hope is that this information, because not everyone can have a Jacinda who knows the data off the top of her head, can actually be a point of reference for their hiring strategies and planning processes, right? Like, this is our policy, this is what we know now that this exists, and this is the way we need to evolve our company.
I'm just going to finish with reaching out to Antoinette, who's not with us physically, but very much in spirit today. And thank you for being part of this conversation. I heard you say that during the conference last month in Las Vegas, like this idea that, the diversity and inclusion, and John Maida was also part of this conversation. The diversity and inclusion conversation is really happening when we talk about employers, and what are the leverage that they have to act upon something like this.
Yeah, for me, I see designers playing a role in the diversity inclusion sector, even though some would argue that there's no sector, even though it is. But I see designers playing two roles. One, how do we actually design and visualize diversity and inclusion? Because many people still, when they think of diversity and inclusion, they see a color wheel. And it's like we have military status, we have gender identity, we have ethnicity, we have religion, we have all these different pieces that actually fall into this diversity inclusion pie. But then also within our industry, how do we make our industry not only more diverse, kind of going to just in this number of 3.5 and 9%, and if we add in Asian American designers and things of that nature, but then how do we build more inclusive practices? And I think kind of going back to that previous question, and when Jonathan said, it affects hiring, and it also affects us thinking about what type of programming and policies do we put in place where people feel included? Because with diversity, that could literally unfortunately sometimes fall into a number game. I have met this quota, but that's why with the task force, we are pushing beyond just diversity and saying we need inclusion where people feel included, they feel accepted, they feel like they are part of the community and they don't have to put on another face to be within the community. Now, obviously, in the future, our goal is equity and then liberation, but we're going to start with, 2 steps at a time and go towards diversity and inclusion. And so, it's one where, John said it best, where he doesn't see design and diversity and inclusion as separate entities. And we've heard this a lot when we say if we're when we have true diverse representation, we come up with better ideas and better solutions. Our industry we are solution developers. That's what we do. We are problem seekers, we're problem solvers. And so we need to make sure that when we're seeking and solving problems, we are representing the community at large and do demographics and psychographics when developing the best solutions for it.
Speaking of inclusion, we're kind of running out of time, and we're getting the questions from everyone in the audience. We're going to have to tell them that we're going to get back to them through another means than this webcast. But again, diversity and inclusion at AIGA, it's also considering the disabled people, to consider also the older people, the kids. It's also a very open and inclusive definition, right?
Well, I don't want to interrupt you really quick, but I do want to be very candid and say that we do like to use people first language. So people with disabilities, people of older age, because we want to not define people based on, based on those definers, but recognize them as people first. So I do want to just throw that out there as well.
Yeah, I'm not practicing my lesson. Sorry. So thank you again for this conversation. To be continued. We will have other webcasts hosted under the aegis of AIGA Diversity and Inclusion. We have another series paralleling, which is the NEA Design for Good webcast series. A lot of these conversations overlap. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for presenting the design census. I hope that everybody on that webcast has already taken the survey as of now. Thank you, Jacinda, for coming from Cleveland to be with us today. Yes. It was so great. And thank you, Antoinette, for participating. We'll be back soon. Have a wonderful holiday.